now call to order the Park Road School District June 22nd, 2026 business meeting at 6:36 p.m. Line acknowledgement, do I have any volunteers? I can do it.
Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across differences. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. The Parkos Board of Education begins this effort by acknowledging that we're gathering in the ancestral and unceded lands of the Chinook, Multnomah, Kaflamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz, Tualatin, Calafia, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River in the Portland area. We pay respect to their elders past and present. We acknowledge them as the past, current, and future caretakers of the site.
Next, we will move to approve the agenda. So do I hear a motion to approve or make any amendments to tonight's meeting agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving tonight's meeting agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. So really quick, so our public comment procedure. So if you wish to submit a public comment online before or during this board meeting, please follow link to the electronic public comment form before reading of public comments on the agenda. For in-person public comment, please fill out an intent to speak card located on the table by the door and hand it to the board administrative assistant, our wonderful assistant, Andrea. All right. So next, we will have an open budget hearing. Proposed budget by our CFO, Sheree Lewis.
I'm Pat and I'm Augie Hitler. Can you bring up the fiscal impact changes? Basically, we approved the budget at the first budget hearing that we had in April. And then from then, we've made significant amount of changes from what we did at the proposed budget to approved. One of the biggest changes is where we could not at the time of a proposed budget put any furloughs, right? So that in turn, waiting for the decisions of all the unions to make whether or not they wanted to do furloughs and stuff. So in the additional budget, there were 26.375 FTE that were cut in the budget. Now, that is not what we ended up with in the budget, right? So what we ended up in the budget is we ended up with 3 retired teachers that were there and then 8 additional teachers that had to be cut. We originally had 13, so that was a change. Since then we've added 2 new teachers, one that's going to be in the new communication classroom that will be at Shaver, similar to the communication classrooms that we have 3 of them at Russell. Then in the classified employees, we started out with 13.375 FTE that was cut. With the understanding that there will probably be some furloughs that was taken by various unions. Both OEA and OSCA agreed upon taking 4 furlough days. The administrators took 5 furlough days. So when we finalized with a 13.375, we ended up with the final classified cuts of 11.25. But with that 11.25, we brought back the basically the family liaisons that were 3.875 of the cuts. So those were part of my cuts. But then we brought them back, not at 3.875, but at 3.5. Because all the support staff now are gonna go from 8 hours a day to 7 hours a day. So they went from 8 to 7, so that was a reduction in FTE for them. But instead of bringing back 3.875, we brought back 3.5. So at the end of the day, the classified, we took away 13.375. We ended up with 11.25 taken, but we brought back 7 positions. So there was way more shifting and moving of the classified staff than we had in the teaching staff. But at the end of the day, the net result, we started out with 26.375. The net result of the change was 13.25. So with the 4 furlough days with teachers and the 4 furlough days with classified and the 5 furlough days for administrators, we were able to get down to 13.1, basically 13.25 cuts at the end of the day. Anybody have any questions on those, on that concept?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that had employees not agreed to furloughs, some of the positions came back due to so the family liaisons is a good example of that. Those positions were scheduled to be cut as part of the reductions that in our agreement. Those furlough days that the classified staff took saved those positions.
And there's some of what the teachers took saved one of the teaching staffs of the elementaries, because we originally took 4, but then we had 3 retirees, so it saved that 1 position from being additionally cut. So there was a lot of moving and shaking that's been done in the budget. The overall budget, when we started it, was $93,436,295. Our ended adopted budget is $94,096,283, which is basically a 0.7% change. That is extremely, considering it's over 1,000 lines for me. I was like, oh, there's got to be more money than this for all the changes I had to do. But that's the overall, the entire budget was only affected roughly $650,000. And with that increase, you had 2 additional classrooms. One for a new pre-K at Sacramento, and one a communication at Sacramento. Sacramento, not at Shaver, not Sacramento. So one of the pre-K will be paid out of Multnomah County, and the communication classroom savings will be paid by the loss of staff or loss of outplaced students that we no longer have because they have graduated or matriculated out of the system. So those savings will pay for the additional communication classroom that we're going to have at Shaver, and the pre-K is being paid by Multnomah County at this time. And each one of them will have 1 teacher and 2 EAs, but right now we're making decisions on how to change the pre-K where it's going to have some additional help, but that's not finalized yet. So where it might have 2 teachers and 1 EA, but until that gets finalized, what's in the adopted is 1 teacher and 2 EAs, which is a similar model that we have for all the pre-Ks.
Yeah, keep in mind that preschool is a separate revenue stream that we can't use to pay for other positions that are not preschool. Ministry and Mitsue that's paid for through the Multnomah County preschool for our all tax. And the communication classroom, I think an important thing to highlight, because we talked a lot about this during the budget, is that obviously one of our driving costs for the district are having to place students out in more specialized settings. The purpose here is knowing we have a lot of incoming kindergartners with pretty high needs, and due to that influx of kids, that would be costing the district millions of dollars in terms of trying to find spots for them. And our youngest kids, oftentimes there are not a lot of placement options for the youngest kids, simply because there aren't a lot of programs offered So this will be, ideally, will ultimately be able to provide like direct neighborhood support in each of the schools. Like we originally started at Russell with the intention of saying, okay, we want to bring some kids back, but we have placed outside the district. That definitely has helped. It's our own neighborhood program. But obviously the distribution of need is that much greater now, especially with incoming primary age kids. So this will be another primary classroom with mostly primary kids and a handful of first grader.
Typically, when he talked about the cost, these are communication classrooms. They're averaging anywhere between $130,000 to $180,000 at MESD right now. So if we would have took that at the 7 kids that we are projected to get in incoming kindergartners, that cost would have been way high. So trying to mitigate that cost, now there will be some other OT, those positions in the district that are gonna have to share and do some ancillary work at Shaver because we haven't had a classroom there. They're all at Russell right now, so we're gonna have to figure out what that's gonna be along with the director. But the cost savings should be roughly about 250 to $500,000, as best that we can look at it based on the number of students that we know at this time were coming in. Now that may shift at any one given day. I know that, right? But if it does shift, we do have enough other children that we know could be in that classroom. So that helps. On the number, the other changes was in the general fund, which is our biggest fund that we have. We had a $247,001 change. That's a 0.6% change. Not very big at all, right? Majority of the change, when you look at the 659,000, 77% of it came from personnel changes. Okay, the other changes that we had was 153,000 in non-personnel, and the biggest part of that 150,000 is 150,000 that was associated with additional costs that we have to pay for outplay services for Chartwells and their management of services. So it's in Fund 202. So when we look at all funds, so that leaves me about $3,000 that were in a few items that were in materials and supplies, and I did think you wanted all the line items for that, but that's what makes up the biggest changes is personnel, and then 150,000 with 53,000 with 150,000 of it being the additional increase in Chartwell's management fees that we have to pay because they are the licensed nutritionists that we have to have on staff to do our nutrition program. Okay. If I was not to have that, I would have to hire them in-house and change the entire process. But that hasn't been that I haven't thought about it. Number 4, we have basically finished the bargaining. We haven't ratified it. It hasn't gone before the board, but pretty much it's done. In the certified bargaining, there were 2 things that were changing the proposed budget is they elected to change their PERS from the district paying the 6% to the 6% being added to their basically salary line. Why? As many as you know, there's tier 1 and 2, and then there's OPSRP and PERS. You have 3 categories. Tier 1 and 2 are allowed to include the 6% as part of their salaries. OPSRP employees, which are employees that have been hired since 2004, they were not allowed to include the PERS as part of their eligible wages. So therefore, they've been asking for several bargaining sessions, and I have not agreed. But it makes sense now that the totality, where we're almost 80% OPSRP now, versus when I started 12 years ago almost, we were 80% OPSRP, tier 1 and 2. If we were all going to be tier 1 and 2, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. But now that we've kind of changed where we are, and most of us old folks have retired or will retire, it makes more sense to change it to where it's actually part of their eligible wages. And I know it's on the agenda of the PERS board because they're getting enough pressure from OPSRP employees to say this needs to change instead of us going through our unions and bargaining our CBAs to make it change. So, but with that, there's a slight caveat, there's a 6.98 that they requested. And that 0.98 basically is, you could say it's an additional COLA or 1% COLA, right? So the way we did the salary schedules is if their wages were 50,000, it's 50,000 times 6 plus the 3% COLA I put in there, which is 9 plus the 0.98. So it's 9.98 is what their salary is going to increase. But in reality, it was already the 3% COLA that we put in the budget. And the only change was the 0.98 that they're proposing, the above the 6%. Does everybody understand that? And it really does. We're at over 80% of our employees that are observed right now.
And it's really just the semantics, is it technically different? You know, the employee has the salary, we take the salary, the 6% from the employee's salary. And as Sheree mentioned, it is just literally a funky rule that when you retire from PERS, you take your 3 highest years of salary, and that's part of the formula that figures out what your pension's going to be. And so it is obviously in the employee's best interest to be able to have that average salary look higher. And it is somewhat of detriment sometimes to Park Rose because people will see like a final teacher's salary right now. You look at our salary schedule, lots of districts don't pick up PERS. So it looks like they're making, you know, you're making $100,000. That's, you know, 6% of that is $6,000. So it also helps the salary schedule look more normalized because we, along with Fresh and Barlow, I think we're the only districts that can do that.
Right. So it is coming more normal in the ask, because as business managers, we all talk. There's very few districts that have switched over the time, but we in my, going into my 12th year, like I said, when I first started, we had tier 1 and 2 at over 80-some%. Now we have observed over 80-some%. Exact opposite of when I was started. So that just means I need to retire. Yes.
Does it make a difference when it implements paycheck? Is that what was done before?
It's done the same way. So every month, I would take it out of the district's coffers, the 6%, and I would write a check when I got the invoice from PERS and said, here's my salary or wages for that month. They multiplied by 6% like I can and said, that's my invoice. And then I would send it, right? And the reconciliation was easy. It's going to be a little bit more complicated now because now I'm going to have basically 197 employees that are going to do it one way and the rest of us are going to do it the other way, right? But right now, that's how it is. So my staff will have to create new accounts, new accounting procedures, and new reconciliations to do it the model that we're doing. So it'll be this year, and then starting next year, in their salary schedule, it will look like their new wage times whatever their COLA is, which is, I believe, 3%, if I remember. And they get that 3%, not the additional 6. So that's 1 year they get that 6.98, and then the following years it's just COLA. So, but every month it'll be a little bit of a hitch and I'll giddy up to learn how to do the reconciliation and we'll make sure that we do it correctly for PERS, because it will be a little bit of trial and error, because not a lot of people around here do it that way. So we'll figure it out.
With the 0.98 is only for 1.
The initial year. So the 0.98, because they got the initial pickup, and the reason is over the years it's the increase in the cost of living and doing the things and the adjustments, because this came in 1992 or 93. I can't remember when PERS started this.
Because they'll pay the tax now.
They have to take
additional money.
on their wages.
98 helps pay for the additional tax. Because that, it looks like income. Even
So-
though it's going to retirement. Later on in retirement, it will become.
And it will be subject to the split, which is the 2.75, which is what we have, or whatever the new number they have for officer. So they'll have more wages that are subject to. But only happens the first year, and then after the first year, their wages will be at what they want them to be, so you don't get a recession. The other, yes,
That 2004, that change.
it's a set year.
Okay.
2000, if you were hired prior to 2004, you're tier 1 or tier 2. He's tier 1 on tier 2, right? Anything after 2004 and after will all be officer. Unless you came and can determine prior years of service that would make you eligible. Okay. Union president, you guys have any comments about that? Okay. The second thing that came up during bargaining was I proposed 2% of insurance, and they countered with 3%, and based off decision of the committee that we agreed to the 3% in insurance. So that will be going forward for that year. Then you go to number 6, some of the fiscal changes that are not associated with personnel. Like I said, I had some increases into what we call current year trend in case it adjusted the taxes. So when we looked at taxes, I was able to increase, because you see that I had $600,000 increase, and I told you when I did the proposed, I had no more money. I had no more money, right? So we did a 3-year analysis of the property taxes, and because of that, I was able to increase it $150,000. The arch tax, when we got the proposed, we hadn't got the final payment from arch tax. So that increase in arch tax allowed me to increase it another $49,000. Now, whether that will continue because they're making changes to the arch tax, I have no idea, and I can't answer all those questions, because I know they changed it to $50 instead of $35, but they also changed the income tax level. So whether that's gonna come in with more money for districts, or that may increase, I don't know. So we budgeted based on what we knew that we got this current year. So that's how we did it. Now I was able to add. Intermediate rate revenue is at $353,000. That is solely the pre-K that's being added at Sacramento. The $328,000 plus they get $25,000 roughly for startup costs. So that's what that increase. State revenue increase actually is because we had a state grant that changed. So that was a $59,000 increase. And the overall ending funding balance over the 21 funds ended up being about a $48,000 increase. So that is the net revenue adjustments that are associated with the payroll cost of $506,000 and the non-personnel cost of $153,000. Way more lines. It's 200 some odd page book. But in the book, similar to as you've seen before, each fund has its fund, object, and the revenue sources. If you want to go through, there's cute little pictures of everybody. And nobody says, yep, I don't want to go through it. But it's not much different than what you saw initially when we presented the proposed budget. Any questions? I did an ED1, if you want to open up that. And the ED50. The ED1 is, and the resolutions. And Schedule A and Schedule B are the requirements that we have to have for you and the taxing commission that appropriates it by level, which is support, instruction, and those kind of things, and all the revenue sources. I have to have that by each phase of what the budget is. So, and then I have the resolutions that you see in there that you guys will have to sign off on. And then the ED1 is the public notice that we sent to the Oregonian that got approved last Thursday. And basically charging us roughly $2,700 for a publication. I love the Oregonian. They're making money. And then basically ED50 is what you saw at the proposed, which is telling you what we're going to appropriate taxes on the total budget and what I'm going to have to appropriate based on the debt that I owe. and that tells you what that limit is. So you'll have to approve those two resolutions that include Schedule A and B, and then basically the ED 50 that basically tells the taxing authority, this is how and what money I have to asking the citizens to appropriate for the debt I owe and the general property taxes, which is $4 and 89 cents, 8906. I don't know how to do the fourth digit because they do not teach you that way. But it's $4.8906. That's what the general public is taxed at, and everything else will be $3,747,419. That's the debt that we have to go out to the public to pay off our debts that we have, and that's the GO bond debt that we have. And it's not the PERS debt, because PERS debts are not subject to taxing authority. So what pays for our PERS debt is the intercept money from the state school fund. That's why our state school fund is reduced by the amount we have to pay for the PERS bond. And the PERS bond savings will be about a little over $500,000 this year, based on the savings and the investment trend that I can see in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Any questions? It's a lot of stuff. Right. And if you don't have any questions, then basically we've gone through the fiscal impact, and if you wanted to go through the book, I'll be glad to go through it with you. But if not, you'll be, I call it the glossary, which is the 2-page fiscal impact statement. Will tell you everything that comes out of the 200 and some odd page budget book and Cliff Notes. That's how I passed college, Cliff Notes. So I didn't have to take all the classes. I was a cop at the time. I didn't have time. So, all right. What's the next step?
We don't have public comments, budget-related public comments, Chair Tabron, so close the hearing.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, so next.
Okay, never mind. I'll go through this. I told you this in this thing.
Guys, like that double header.
Yeah, more than you know. To teach me not to fall off the ladders, I might run around for
At this point, you want this?
Okay, these 3 things, and I didn't get a chance to call Robin,
He is online.
He's online.
because, sorry, Robin, but I was already up here and didn't get a chance to text you in time. These things are asking for the board to approve them, because what we have to do is we have 3 major projects, one through ELSO, that's basically going to do some improvement to the underground and drainage that we have at the Prescott upper playground and the lower playground, right? And part of the educational development of ELSO, they would like to basically have the board's allowance to give an exception to the contracting rule to go out with what we call CGMC, which basically allows us to hire a contractor that's gonna manage that project for us, right? But when you hire that CMGC, you'll go through basically a evaluation of that. You just won't have to do every vendor in the project. That will be they're responsible as the CMGC. Okay? That make sense? It's one of the rules, if we get an exception to contracting rules, and we usually have to come to the board if we have $1 million projects that are over a certain value level, and we ask you for your approval of the contracts. This is asking for an exception so we can use the CMGC contractor to run these 3 projects and do the things they need to do with the funds that we're going to be giving them, with the oversight of Robin and myself. There will be oversight of the district. I'm not giving up and saying, here's the $8 million of PSEP, go forth and do with. No, I will not do that. But it gives me the ability to bring in that that person that has the subject matter expertise that Robin and I may not have. Robin, did I say anything that was incorrect? And he's looking. Maybe not. So, and what we're asking that we have to get the board is, one of us is doing geothermal, that is at 2 different schools. The other one is looking at Prescott and doing, basically other energy efficiency projects at Prescott. And then we have the other one that's the ELSO, ELSO will be using PSEP money. So all of this is not our general fund, our capital money. 2 of them are our PSEP money that we already have put in the grant, which is the window replacement and some other things at Prescott. And then at Russell and Sabre are the geothermal evaluation, and trying to geothermal basically could bring in not HVAC, but bring in geothermal that is our HVAC. Okay? But it allowing us to hire a CMGC that will manage that project in a manner that they have a day-to-day, everyday prospect of doing this job, instead of having Robin, who's all over the bandwidth doing the district between landscaping, maintenance, all other. They can focus on just managing this project. And this is how it's done at EPS and other places throughout the country. But we have never done a lot of that because we've tried to manage it. However, when they did the middle school, we had a CMGC, the major contractor who did the middle school, had that kind of project. And I can't remember their name right now, and I'm feeling really bad. I wasn't fond of them, but yes. As I don't want to remember. Robin, did I miss anything? I'm gonna get you tomorrow if you don't speak up.
So to clarify, the Prescott work is the seismic grant, which is seismic upgrades for Prescott. Keep in mind, the state provides these grants that we apply for. We just have to get one at Prescott, and which is good because Prescott has the need. And then the energy upgrades, specifically the windows.
Yep.
Because Prescott's windows, we haven't been to Prescott lately. The main building windows are extremely difficult to close if you can. So that requires also kind of a restructuring of the architecture a little bit, because these aren't the type of windows you can just pop out but do like that. So that's a much bigger project.
We're gonna basically take out all the big windows that are way too big and way too heavy for any individual to move them up and down. Downsize them, put in smaller windows to keep some of the energy efficient, and replace the blinds, because if you'll notice, they'll have blinds that go almost the whole length of the wall, but there's not enough support in them. You can get them down, but pulling them up, we are constantly repairing. So there's a lot of energy efficiency problems at Prescott, and some of that can be done with some of these energy. So, any questions? And these are things that does require the board approval. That all depends on when we have to hire them first. Then we've done some of the engineering and some of the basically ground testing for the geothermal, but then it takes the engineer and the architect, those all have to start flowing. So these projects, like, I was hoping that the windows could be done this summer. I had a lofty expectation, which I know I shouldn't do, so it will be another year from now.
Are there are like subcontractors
Yeah, don't want to be the Oregonian.
No, I'm not PPS, thank you very much. I know where you're going with that. There are requirements for PSEP, the things that you have to do in respect to what you can hire. Like, you'll have to have so much student involvement, so much of this, you have to do equity analysis. Those, if you could think that we were tight-lipped, the city of Portland, who is actually managing the PSEP money, they're even more tight-lipped. So we'll have to follow very strict guidelines of contracting rules to ensure that we've met all those guidelines with these series of funding. So, yes, there will be additional steps that we have to do in nauseam. Oh, yes. Do I know every one of them off the top of my head? No, I do not. I have a checklist in an email somewhere. I could probably give you if you need that. She's. Right. And something like. Nope. I think I did a lot of the reporting already.
We have a PFA monthly report. Yeah, both of us this time. So, not really too much to go over, as, again, repeating, I know we're in the final stages of it, but again, gratitude of going through the, contract negotiation process and reaching, the, concluding end to that. Just again, extending our appreciation, to the district for, working through that with us. And so hopefully again, goes smoothly. The, big piece of news is, my position, at the middle school was one of the cuts. And so there is again, there's a possibility that over the summer, there could be other positions, but there is a chance that, I will not be returning as vice president. So, one, if that is the case, I just wanted to extend my appreciation for you guys putting up with me, attending all the meetings and, doing my best as a rookie, freshman essentially in this executive role. But hopefully I will get to continue moderating next year. We'll just see how it goes. So, just giving you a heads up as far as that goes. Our plan, if I do not return, is to, hold elections at the start of the fall, to try to find a VP. So Kalia doesn't have to do all the work, which she already does. And so, yeah, that's essentially, all we really have comments on again in summer, so not, too much drama to bring. We'll see when the year next year starts.
Thank you guys. It takes two parties to do.
You know,
Ourselves. A couple of three extras if anybody wants to look on, but these, place here. Hello, everyone. Gary sends his regards. He's taking some well-earned vacation time today. But I am coming to talk about a number survey that we did. So Yeah, for a classified staff survey, we didn't limit it to just dues payers. We wanted to get as many people involved in the conversation as we can. To that end, I would like to thank all of the classified staff, including those who are watching at home, for showing up today, in support. I think that we have the best possible chance for positive change when we're all involved in the conversation. So thanks to everybody who's moving that forward. Excuse me. So I cut a handout of our results. We just asked mostly yes or no questions so that we could just get a temperature check on where people are at with different experiences and maybe struggles in their work areas. Just kind of like put some data to like things that we had been hearing about anecdotally and see where things land. So the pie charts in black and white didn't turn out very well. I apologize for that.
They are in color on the.
Oh, they are in color. Oh, they're on the screen. Thank you so much. But also just the basic percentages are also like printed on the first page here. So just to like go over it a little bit by section, and I'd be happy to take any questions people have. So our first section, working conditions, just to ask some general questions about, fair pay and fair treatment. The big headline, I suppose, is that about 25% of our respondents said that they felt they were paid fair market value for the work they do. That might be hard news to hear in these really lean budgetary times. But the OSCA is hopeful that we can work with the district to alleviate that disparity as much as we can. We had, as far as actual job duties, matching job description and having an equitable workload is actually accomplishable within your workday. We're sitting at about 60% saying yes, which means, about a third of our workers are working outside their job description and taking on more work than they can accomplish or that they should be, right? Some specific feedback we got, we're hearing about staff taking on duties like sometimes on their own initiative, like beyond their job description, just because that's the only way the work can get done, which kind of tells us that the way our workplaces and our schedules and everything are structured right now isn't actually, sufficiently running our schools, right? So we want to find a way to work within, again, the limited budget to do what's necessary to support our students and actually pay our workers fairly for it. So yeah, I think that's, oh yeah, and we were asking if people were being required to clock in at work because some people were reporting that they were, and then not everybody was. So it turns out that about 37%, so about a third of our workers are being required to clock in at work, whether it be a time clock plus or some other method, and then 2/3 are not. So we're just looking for like consistency on that front. Does anybody have any questions about that section? Yeah.
Maybe just.
We're not really sure. We're kind of hoping that administrators can tell us. I think everybody is using Time Plus Plus across the board for time keeping and requests off and stuff like that. But as far as actually having to punch in and out at a time, that seems to be inconsistent. Did you have something to say about it, Sherry?
Time clock was initiated the second year I was here. It was meant to have everybody initially use time clock to clock in and out. We decided after that next bargaining session that that would not happen. It would only be for those employees, particularly those that are in nutrition, those that are in transportation, maintenance, and custodial. Why? They typically arrive before most managers are even on site, right? So, and they have the infrequency of hours, particularly transportation. So that was the decision that they would be the ones that were clocking in and out.
Sure, you said nutrition, sorry, I wanted to get the list down. So it's nutrition, custodial,
Transportation and maintenance.
okay,
So
got
we
it.
make up about, there's quite a few people, if I added up, I don't know how many people took your survey. So,
Yeah, we had, we didn't have as much as we would like, to be perfectly honest. You know, a little less than a third of our total classified staff. We were hoping to get as much, as many voices as we could. That's what we did. So yeah, not really sure how that shakes out in terms of the demographics of
you had
those
what,
positions.
40, 50 people take the survey?
Yeah, like 43, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so 10-month, like paraprofessionals, EAs, we don't have them locked
Okay.
their badges.
The reason why, because in the time clock system, it's very difficult, because each school, if you have them clock in and out, requires them to have specific schedules. All EAs at each school are not on the same schedule,
Right.
right? So you would have to create individual schedules for each individual EA that has a different schedule. And the system wasn't designed that way, right? So therefore, these principals of the schools are responsible for ensuring when they clock in and check in and check out.
That must be every time I make a time off request in time clock, I have to adjust the time that it thinks my shift is.
That would be the
Okay.
answer.
Cool. So, yeah, to move on to the section B, which I called equity, sorry, did you have any question about?
My other question, which you answered one of them, how many people took it?
Yeah.
What percentage that was? Folks that did it, but, all of it.
Yep.
But is it broken down by roles or?
We did not break that down by the classification, yeah. I mean, I say we, I was kind of working on it, I was a one-person team on that one, so, yeah, I was just, yeah. I did have, this was a learning experience for me, like, as I got the responses in and was compiling the data, I had a lot of thoughts of, I would have phrased that question differently, or I would have, like, broken things down, or, yeah, but this is what we got. Cool. So the second section, we asked if people have observed or experienced significant equity issues at their job site, and if they've experienced or observed significant safety issues at their job site. So we got 39.5% said yes, they experienced equity issues. 41% said yes, they experienced safety issues. So, upwards of a third of our respondents are seeing that at their workplaces. We do see that like 2/3 said that the management was taking the issues seriously when they were being brought to them, which I think is a good foundation. Like, most of the time when we do have equity issues, and you're going to have them, right? You can't prevent people from being human and being flawed, and you can design and direct your community towards certain values, but the fact is we're going to have them. So most of the time those are being taken seriously. I think that's a really great foundation to like work toward bringing that number up closer to 100%, if that makes sense. Does anybody have any questions about that section? Yes.
Yeah, so thinking about that equity issue,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about
Absolutely.
I'm curious, why, how do we start to, I guess, assess the traits and characteristics?
That's a good question.
And why I say that, because you think about, and you're not wrong. People being human. Here, that's feel like they look like, and then thinking about the data, like seeing, race, gender, different things of that nature, tenure, all of those things.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's room for thinking about how we structure, like our interview process, to screen for those kind of values, right? To see if they're not just a good professional ability fit, but also a good values fit. Yeah, I don't have any answers on that, but I think that's really important to consider.
Yeah, I think, yeah, cause I mean, to your point, I think sometimes people are quick but not fit.
Yeah,
So
that's a
people
good way to put it, yeah.
Some people are fit but not yet.
Yeah,
So just thinking about that, sometimes people can people.
oh, of course, right, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, I 100% agree. So, does anybody else have anything on this section?
For me, it's just what having, having the, extra details of, for instance, the school, like who answered from what.
Yeah, right, right.
Answered, like, something like that, you can see if there's this, and, you know, they're the 39%, 60%.
Right,
And then it's, and also safety.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
I think they would be helpful too.
yeah, of course.
And then you can look at it, like, oh, okay, well, the voice, they're saying this, and having a different.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and like I said, this was, the aim of this particular survey was
Yeah.
kind of a surface level temperature check. I would love to dig deeper in the future, but,
Me too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right, if we want to go to section C, this was about our evaluation procedures. Specifically, we were asking if people received an evaluation during their probationary period. Did they receive their annual evaluation? And we went back like the last school year. So we saw a pretty big drop from like 71% or 72% saying that they did receive their annual evaluation last school year, but only 56% or so received it this year. So that's a pretty significant drop. I don't know what that says about, you know, again, we were just with some of the other, like with the time clock, we were just looking at, is there consistency in people's, in the way people are being supervised and the way they're being evaluated and stuff like that.
Some of the consistency has to do with the 260-day employees. Because when you're looking at it in the survey, a lot of 260-day employees don't get theirs until later after. When we think about the end of summer. Because they start the new
Interesting,
academic
okay.
year starting in September.
Yeah.
So you
So
have
if you're
to
a
think
12
of their
month, you're not
period of
getting
time.
evaluated within the school year. Okay.
That is a large amount, all the custodians, all the maintenance. So thinking of those 260-day employees.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. You know, I will admit, I am a parent educator. I don't always know what other people are dealing with in their roles. Like I've heard a lot from Gary about what he, what he does in his custodial position, but yeah, that's good information. Thank you. Yeah, does anybody else have any questions about evaluation? Okay, cool. So we asked special education employees a couple of questions about how they're being supported in their roles. We asked if they have been provided. I wrote this. I should be able to say it. Providing sufficient training and support for serving the special education students, and also if they have been provided reasonable access to the behavior plans and IEPs that they need to do that job. And the numbers are pretty similar. 60% say that they've got sufficient training. 66.7 say that they have access to their IEPs. We did get some specific feedback that, and just to be clear, I'm not going to read out any individual responses that people gave us in the interest of protecting our workers' privacy, but I am summarizing, some of what we heard. Yeah, what we were hearing from our special ed staff was that they need more staff in their schools that are trained in CPI, the conflict prevention training that we do, more support with challenging behaviors, more prompt response when they call for support, and protection from injury when some of these student behaviors that are hazardous to the receiving end of, right? And I think, we're seeing that our SPED staff are spread really thin, and the support systems that back them up are strained, kind of, maybe beyond what they're capable of. And so I've think that this shows us that we need to find ways to better support our workers, in this really demanding role, in a way that'll benefit both students and staff, right? Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? Yeah.
So was this question asked of everyone, or was there an
Um,
option, like, not applicable?
It was an optional question. I first asked, do you work in special education? And then I said, if so, if so. Some people that are not in special ed did answer, and I filtered those answers out manually, looking at the, matching them. So yeah, this was definitely only special ed workers that are included in this data. I'm thinking of ways to idiot-proof the survey next time, where like, you won't actually be clicking it if you aren't in sped, but that's how that worked out. Anybody else on this one?
And, were any of the feedback that was, when they say, I think, that
What I took that from, because I don't work in sped this year, but I have worked in sped for most of my educational career. And definitely last year at my site, we have a system where we call on a walkie if we need some additional support. And that is often admin, but it will sometimes be like behavior specialists and things responding. And sometimes you would call and there would just be no answer, or there would be an answer that nobody's available. And if you're out in an unsafe situation by yourself and just you and a student, then, that's, frustrating and concerning sometimes, right? So that's what, from the responses I got, that's what it sounded like to me. Yeah.
How many of the responses were sped?
What's that?
How many of the people, of the 40-some that were
15.
15?
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I had to go through and check the names of the sped people and then match them with the answers and make sure I filtered out the other ones, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, anything else on that one? I think we just got one more section. So our last section is just kind of our overall like workplace culture. We asked if our classified employees feel valued and respected to the same degree as teachers and to the same degree as administrators. And the results weren't very positive. If less than half of our classified staff feel respected the same as teachers, and just over a quarter of them feel respected the same as administrators. This kind of speaks to what we have been hearing anecdotally about, classified staff feeling devalued, feeling like an afterthought, feeling lesser than in their workplaces or within the district. And, the OSCA really believes that, there are a lot of different roles that are really vital to our school's running, like everyone from the people in this room to anyone else. Every role is important. I trust that everybody on this board and everybody else that's listening, shares those values, and we can work together to foster a more positive and equitable, learning community. Yeah, does anybody have a thought on that? Okay, go ahead, Max.
So for this, do you feel that your value and respect? I'm also curious, I know, there are changes that you would want to make to these questions, but for that one, is it valued and respected by other teachers? Is it by their supervisor? Is it by greater, communities, by students?
Yeah.
Because I've heard that sometimes there can be, different relationships with teachers and maintenance or teachers, other things, so that, and then all other
Yeah.
to know who they're thinking of when answering these sorts of questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't get data in with that degree of granularity. I mean, I am curious about that too. We, it was a tricky balancing act, like designing a survey that would give us some good information and also not be too much of a demand on people that they would blow it off and not answer it, right? And, yeah, so the questions didn't really strain for like valued or respected by who, just do you feel valued or respected? You know, that could be teachers not respecting EAs, that could be, you know, other people not respecting maintenance, or, you know, admin not respecting this, you know, whatever, like, there's, and I didn't get a lot of specific feedback about, you know, beyond like, you know, stuff like equal pay, right? Or equal pay raises and stuff like that, but I didn't get a lot of specific feedback about how they feel respected or not, but, yeah, that's what I thought.
Is it possible to think about any feedback? For like, bring it to survey? I kind of look at like.
Yeah.
Cause I mean, let's just call it spade.
Oh, sure.
I work, I would be curious to see kind of like that correlation effect. My experience, I think sometimes classified, I'm speaking from part of perspective. Have those like kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I definitely didn't look at this as like the end of a conversation or the end of a process like this. I think we want to keep like tracking this and seeing how it develops and seeing how it evolves, right? I also am a, you know, a freshman board member on our union chapter. So yeah, I think that we want to do more of this. We want to do it more often. We don't want to do it earlier. We want to find more nuances, like you, like you've all been saying. So yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
Cause I think like just the information that helps guide us. I think sometimes people treat equity as a destination.
Yeah,
Definitely a journey. So thinking about like mission statement, our value, portrait of a graduate, maybe have kids do a portrait of a teacher. Things like that seem as well. Like, okay, we're finished.
yeah. I don't think we're ever finished, right?
Absolutely.
You know, yeah. I think the completed equitable liberated society is a ways off, you know, for sure. But yeah, we're just gonna keep working on our end, and for you all to keep working on your end to bring that to greater heights. So yeah.
I have a question. When was the survey issued?
What's that?
When did you issue the survey?
We issued it 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Yeah. We were trying to get some responses before the school year ended. We kept it going, you know, I closed answers today, you know, I wanted to give people a chance to trickle in late, and a few people did. But yeah, that was when we did that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of, I think, you know, as you know, I'm, you know, part of the bargaining process, and we were thinking about, you know, issues that have been raised during the process and just in general during our deliberations over the contract. And so we wanted to get some clarity on things and see how that could guide us.
I have, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Good job.
Chair break, run, no in-person public comment.
Next, our consent agenda, really quick, description for consent agenda items or items of routine business that are voted on block. Board members may state brief, clarifying questions, comments after a motion is seconded. For lengthy deliberation of an item, board members or student representatives made motion for an amended consent agenda, removing an item from the list and consider it as a separate motion later. So with that being said, after reading the description, if I hear a motion to approve or make an amendment to tonight's consent agenda. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda passes. And come on up. Told you, might as well just. You gonna sit right here?
The next three things, first one is the supplemental budget, and supplemental budget is talking about an amendment we're making to fiscal year 25-26 budget. Basically, we have to do these things if we have received new funding. We made anything that is significant change to the budget that I need to understand fiscal. And we did make a change on basically June 4th. We received roughly $3.7 million because we went out for a loan. We told everybody we were gonna do that. With that, that means I have to amend the budget, right? With that, some of the things I have to do, because in the budget, I basically put the money in what we call an LGIP, which is an investment pool that is run by the state, that everybody that is a school district or an ESD, they flow their funds through there. And that's because I'm not an investment broker, right? I have one at PPS, but I don't have one here. If I could trade on the market, I would be able to trade and invest dollars, but I don't have those rights. So I have to do everything through what we call a local government investment pool, LGIP. And that's where these funds went. So when we sold these investments on June 4th, they went into an account, our general fund. And because of the agreements that I signed in the loan document, I said that they had to be segregated funds, right? Because they have to earn interest on their own value, right? Which means I can't commingle them with all the other funds that I have, because then I wouldn't be able to determine how much interest it earns. If you think of your own checking account and your own savings account, think of it that way. So when I moved that money in from the general fund and I moved it into LGIP, the reason I got the money is because we're running short in the general fund. So now I have to take in the governmental accounting rule, I have to transfer money out of that TAN fund, which is Fund 201, and transfer it into the general fund so I could appropriate it and be allowed to spend it. Because without appropriating it in a fund, I can't spend it. The only fund I could spend it in would be the TAN fund. And I don't want to spend it in the TAN fund because I would have to journal entry every expense that I had to do. I'm not doing that. So the way we do it is basically we do a budget transfer, put the money in the general fund, and if I have to use it and I assign it what we call a sub area, it'll have its own little sub area, which uniquely is the same number as its fund 201. How unique is that? Huh? So when I want to find the expense, all I have to run in the accounting system is the number, the last three numbers, and put a 201 to it, and I know that that's the expense I need to go find, and that's how much I spent of the money that I took from TAN, right? So basically, what that's bringing over is that $3.67 million, and I split it out in between instruction and support, and put the other money as basically transfers in as bond proceeds, and then allows me to spend it. That is the whole gist of what this supplemental budget is. But I cannot, as I appropriated in the budget every year, as you guys did in the adopted you just did, there was a TAN fund there, right? And I, for the 11 years, 12 years I've been doing budget here, I always budget for a TAN. Never plan to use them. Huh. So now I have to use them, so now I move the money. So this is the instrument that requires me to move it from the TAN fund, which is 201, into the general fund to allow me to use it if necessary. Which I told you when I went out for the debt, this is what I would be doing. I then processed the journal entries with the auditor to make sure they knew I was doing, and they were like, yep, that works, and then this is what I'm doing. Any questions on this? The only thing that you will see, we did better on the sale on June 4th than we thought. We thought we were going to be basically $3,750,000. We ended up being $3.7,982,000. So we actually had a better par value than what we thought we originally were gonna have. So with that better par value, that means I'm gonna have a little bit less interest, but my bond premium went from like 20,000, my bond premium is now like almost 26,000. So, and I don't do investments for a living, but I do speak par and premium and stuff like that. So that's in that little statement, number one, explains what it is. But at the end of the day, I will have to pay back the amount I owe, which is the interest expense for the year I'm gonna own the money, basically 9 months I have to own the money. I'll have to pay $3,759,525 back. Because we do have interest expense, but we will also be able to earn interest income. That's why the cash sits actually in the TAN fund to accrue interest. It doesn't sit in the general fund. It sits in the LGIP TAN fund. So the cash is there. But I'm able to spend it in the general fund. Don't move the cash, I move the budget authority, which is two different things in my world. Okay? Does anybody understand that? You're looking at me like going, I don't know about that. Go ahead.
So going back to investments. Situation and
Right. The LGIP is a local government investment pool, is the state-run bank account. So every school district in the state uses a version of LGIP. In this district, have 3 LGIPs. I have one for the bond, I have one for TAN, and I have one at this point, because when I went out and got the debt for all the buses, the QZEV, that was my other one. Okay, so I have those, and then I have my main checking. My main checking where all the Multnomah County, the state school fund, all those things will come through the main LGIP. So I have 4 main. One is tied to our local government, that's our main checking, and then I have 3 that are tied to debts. TAN, because Mary Larson, way before me, back in the 1990s, actually had a TAN debt, right? But she never spent all the money. So over the years, it's been accruing interest. So it had about $70,000 in interest, and I've been sitting and sitting and sitting. I can't use it because I can't spend it on anything yet. Now that I have another TAN debt, I can use it. But I couldn't use it because I didn't have any of the obligations at that time. So it's been accruing interest for the 11, 12 years I've been here.
so you can't buy it.
No. So this is a funny question because I had this question. I had somebody who in this district, lovely person of Intel, donated stock. In this district, we cannot own or sell stock. It's part of our investment policy, which you would have known if you were here when we did the first bond, because I had to redo the entire investment policy of the district because it didn't align with what the state ruled for. But we as a district can't not sell or receive stock. I still get $1.10 or 20 cents every once in a while. I've been trying to give back the stock to Intel for the 11 years I've been here. But the auditors have not written me up, thankfully. I did not receive the stock, but we do have stock from Intel, and it's worth about $8,000 right now if I was to sell it. But I only receive the interest that I earn every month off. But I'm trying to give it back, so I'm in compliance with the state investment.
Tree, just as a reminder, so the likelihood of having to use the loan is in the fall when payroll comes. Is that
Well,
fair to
that's-
ask or say?
well, that's to the next subject that we're gonna go to,
Okay,
which is the board copy of the May's financial statements. When Michael and I were reviewing the financial statements, and I have told you every month I've been here for the last 4 or 5 months, that we're really, 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 really close. Well, this month, we're really close. We're 148,000. But in that 48,000 to the good, I'm relying on about 900 to $1 million in encumbrances not to come to fruition. Because people have over encumbered so much right now. I have about $500,000 spent and some other things that I could see that are duplicates, or we put more money. I have one PO for fuel at $600,000. I've never spent $600,000 on fuel in this district, probably in maybe 5 years. So I know there's some surplus there. So I went through every line item expense that I could find for every major vendor to come up with that surplus to get to a positive 148,000. So is there a chance by the end of June that I may have to use some of it? The answer is yes. Am I going to try my damnedest to not use it? Yes. Right? But in precaution, I've done the supplemental budget in case I do have to spend it. Right? I'm always on the conservative side. I moved it over. I really didn't think I was going to have to until I got to the end of April and went, oh, maybe I might have to move that. And that's why I rushed to do a supplemental budget. Right? So I'm moving it with the hope 80 to 85% that I won't have to use it. But there is, I'm not going to lie to anybody, there is some chance I may, if everything that I look in the financials, and I looked at over 100 vendors, that things don't come back the way they look to be, where they are. And I look to make sure where all the expenses, have we paid every bill up through May? Have we looked at anything that when it's outstanding and calling some people, did you actually do those services and do I owe that bill? But every June that comes, and when everybody goes on their pina colada time and they go and have your summer breaks, which you guys are doing right now, I get invoices and somebody says, oh yeah, you owe this money. And I'm like, I don't have a PO for that. So I know there will be something, but what it will be, I don't know. So that's that 15% I'm saying, Michael, I love your theory, but I'm going to be very cautious to say I might have to use some. Because I don't have a lot of money at the end of the day. Never in my years have ever been this short. But one of the biggest issues when you look at this financial statement, $4 million we are overspent in purchase services. And it's all in one line item. Special education. One line item, one department. All outplaced services. Now, I can't say that I don't have overages at other departments. I do. But none of them near anywhere the $4,082,675. That's how bad I know that number. And that is true.
so in our discussion, just kind of help the board as we head into next school year on advocacy. So the 4 million, of that 4 million, how much are we gonna get reimbursed for that?
Right now, you're at 28 cents on the dollar.
Yeah. So we're gonna get just a little over $1 million
And we don't get reimbursed,
next May.
next.
And
So
because
that's the reason
we
we're
took,
cash poor.
and because we took what the methodology was ahead of time, we're probably only gonna get about 10% of that. Because we took our money up front. I took that money up front because this district was subject to already $4.8 million in cuts, and they were gonna cut me by $350,000 to $400,000. So I said, I will take my money now, and I'll fall out later, and I'll prepare for the next 12 months until May 15th, and I will prepare for a loss then. But I was not going to take a loss when they gave no notification, so I raised hell, I won, but 99% of the state didn't go my way. They chose to do the new state methodology in hopes that they get a gift on May 15th of next year. And I don't have a prayer's chance that the state is actually gonna agree to what they said they're gonna. Because the number of special education students are increasing. So that $55 million are gonna be a big change. So the last thing I have, so any questions on the May general fund with the 148,000? It's dismal, but right now it's still in the green, not in the red. We did some maneuvering, but I'm very honest of where it is, and Michael knows exactly what we had to do to make it be where it is. Next one is the board's budget. Unfortunately, I could not get you out of the red. Right now, we have spent more money than we have in the budget. We know one of the problem solvings of that is when I adopted the budget, they made some adjustments to your budget that weren't there. Unfortunately, when you look at next year's budget, you didn't get an increase, so you're gonna be in the same place you are this year. We're just gonna have to spend differently, I hope. And we don't have all these COSA and OSBA expenses that we've had this year that have been pretty excessive. So, but right now, we have a little bit of encumbrance, but I think that's associated with your coffee thing, based on the last thing I could see, and it's still left over. The last thing I could see. And you'll still have some outstanding expenses associated with your students that still haven't hit the GL that I know of, because that payroll was through April and May. So we did have some kids that came to the board meeting in June, so they'll be there yet. So, that's not the end of it. So I apologize. I wish I could give you more money, but there's none there. And in the July resolutions, there will be a resolution, as I said I would do, about board incentives or supplemental pay that we would pre-make. That will be part of the July board. Any questions? Introducing fees, and basically, they went up this year. I'm hoping they don't go up a large amount again this next year. We'll see. Yep. Yep. I get it. But the things to buy the software to do, for Andrea to do what she needs to do, they're a little excessive for a small agency. I think anybody that sits on that board or there should, if there would be one way for me to advocate or say to them, is their per FTE or per ADM is not appropriate for small agencies, and they need to adjust it associated with poverty and census data. Because it's not, it is way above what a normal. The same as the Oregonian charging me roughly $2,700 for a public notice. And I've said something to the Oregonian, really? I have half a page on the Oregonian on the last section of the life section. Nobody's reading the damn thing, but I'm still required by law to put it somewhere, or I have to send it to every citizen in Park Forest District. And this is the only way I don't have, And if I did that, I'm spending 63 cents per stamp. So add it up.
There's no electronic option.
You can, but you could not prove that you sent it that way. The law has not changed to benefit that concept. Yeah,
There's proof. I'm kidding.
no, that's not proof. So, those are the financials. The two things that we'll need is the supplemental and the adopted budget, and obviously the three things from Rock that we'll need. If you guys have any questions on those 5 things, let me know.
Tree.
No, I was make them, here.
Andrea, I don't know if we,
No,
14B.
are you just postponing till July? Okay, got it.
14B, so discuss interest rate share price. For 26.
Gonna put that up there.
Before we go there, can we discuss disinterest? No, I'm just kidding.
I've done 2 years of chairing and vice chair. And gonna look to my years over here. Interested in vice chair. And if not, I will continue as, I'm assuming that you're. Yeah.
Sure.
Perfect.
No, I'm kidding.
Maybe.
No, I mean, yeah. No, how y'all do?
Yeah, I gotta think about it.
I mean, yeah, if it's one of those things.
Give us
Yeah, you guys will, you'll have a section in the agenda at the organizational meeting. At that point in time, just prepare for nominations and select. Chair.
14B, so, graduation recap.
Oh, there's a video, which we need to watch that. But the graduation stage.
Looks like it's an hour.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a-
No, we don't have to laugh at the reaction.
Sorry,
Speech, the kid speech, listen, if I'm gonna watch an hour video, it's gonna be about X-Men or something.
Oh, not the budget?
I'm sure it is.
I guess I'd like to start your first budget. I took you.
In there.
How'd you feel, first one?
Exactly, good set of budget there. Especially if you listen to it there.
Any other thoughts people wanna share?
Well, one thing I wanna ask you all, I did a little survey of other districts, meaning I went to my superintendent's meeting, I said, tell me what your ceremony was like. So, cause one of the things that I wanted to check in about is that obviously it's a really long line of shaking hands. And, I just wanna know how you feel about it, because it is, you're standing there for a long time, especially for people who are at the very end of the line, you're the 7th or 8th person that the kids are. and I'll just say my opinion to start. I love that they have people greeting them and congratulating them. And I love that, you know, like you can see the relationships between like the administrators and the kids, right? Like that's all beautiful. But I also just want to check in. It's like sometimes you just do things because it's always been done that way. And just want to know like what your comfort level is. The board's always going to be on stage and like be part of the ceremony. It's just like being part of the ceremony in that way, or like change it. But I really do think it's up to us. Yeah, I mean, that's totally fine. I just thought like, I know we kind of got squished.
I think this year felt.
It was, we were more squished.
Yeah,
They put us in front
squished.
of the podium.
Yeah.
And I did learn the reason they put us in front of the podium is because there was some tripping and stumbling of students who had to go behind the podium last year. And then, you know, the cords for the mics and stuff were there. But I just wanted to check in because I realized. I think so. I mean, I think, again, I think ahead of time, we're just like, hey, can we just make sure that there's enough room for everybody to,
I
you
think
know,
that was
greet
the
and say
only
hi.
thing that I
Yeah.
But for me, it's my favorite thing because I'm able to connect students and then just I love seeing their stashes and I love seeing their grad caps and the excitement that they have and I don't and none of them feel like they have to shake our hand. The ones that didn't want to they pop by and I didn't feel any type of like okay. I understand there you just shook big people's hands with it, it's great. But I don't know, for me it's like one of my favorite things. And of course, like again, I'm like hand sanitizer, but
That's the expectation.
but I mean, I enjoyed it. The only thing I didn't enjoy this year was how we were like, you know,
And the sea of people, like getting out. Boy, that seemed like so many more people. But I think it's like that every year where I exited the building.
I really like how
Read.
at the end, people and I love how it, not many other districts don't allow that, right? Or you hear from other places outside of Oregon of like, you know, that's not allowed and all that. So I just love how everyone can just be their self and
Yeah.
and represent their culture and represent themselves. That's for me. That's my favorite. I don't know.
I agree.
What other?
It's all different. It's so crazy, right? Like just the little nuances.
Do they
Some
sit
it's
back?
just like some it's the board chair, like just the board chair. I think that was a couple of the districts, and then there, I think alongside us, maybe it's David Douglas County, there was another district where it's like the board and just the principal. I think we're the only high school that includes the assistant, which I think is important because there, as you can see, it's like it's not a huge high school. So for so many of them, they have relationships with each one of those administrators which I think is great. Great way for them to celebrate and obviously the joy on their face. It's just like, that's just my opinion. Good speeches, they were all different. Yeah, it's great. And this year, you probably noticed, so the last two speeches were, they kind of open it up for all students to submit a speech and say, like, so that's why the two students that were not valedictorian school board members got which I know.
And we did have one school board. I thought-
Yeah, Jackson didn't speak, and I think it was just
Okay.
I think it was a last minute decision.
Is
I
that-
think people get stage fright.
Yeah, I thought it was here. He's like,
Perfect.
Go ahead. I kind of got two thoughts, ideas. Wow, I mean, I do share the same thing. Shake. So like I saw this video, of this first grade teacher. She had this park fire. She asked, saying,
Yeah.
how would you like to be greeted? So like, handshake. And I know it can be awkward. But to. Like, and again, that's just an idea, I'm not saying that, like I said, by the time they get to like the first, like, man, and also thinking about, so like the difference in like celebration, 'cause honestly, so I switched with Brenda. Because I knew that there were gonna be some kids, you know, like Oscar was gonna try to like wrestle me, you know, stuff like that, where like the greetings are different, so it's just like not wanting to disrupt, but I mean, I feel like it's cool the way it is, but if there were ever like a sentiment to like maybe be innovative, again, for us to be able to graduate, like, and again, that's just like trying to think about just say like can't start eating the podium. Like this with T-Rex on her.
For me, it was normal.
Good night, everybody. That was almost.
So yeah, thinking about I'm cool to wait.
Sure. Well, we have some time to think about that. It's one of the, but yeah, I agree, Brenda. It's one of my, you're so tired by the end of the school year, and it just gives you energy, right? Spirit of the kid. I think one of the beautiful things too is like, for some of the kids, you know what that journey is like, right? You know, like some of the ups, the downs. You remember people in elementary school saying like, I don't know about this kid, right? And there they are, they're graduating, they've navigated things in a really exceptional way and seen them grow so much. And it's just great. And then, you know, it's frosting on the cake when you go out to the park block and you see the kids with their families and everybody's just so happy. That is a big milestone. And all of the kids, I think Molly said in her speech, like all of the kids that walked across that stage got their diploma, right? Sometimes that is not the case.
Like poster outside that.
Oh my gosh.
Right. I'm gonna quickly revisit, share my screen here. Make it work. I wanted to, so at our last meeting, I presented some comparison data that was related to performance in math. And Mariah, you had asked some specific questions that were kind of getting a little more granular. Okay, well, how do you compare this? Kind of similar in the way we thought this would. And what I wanted to do is just show you, like, again, these are the diagnostic tests that the district facilitates versus like the statewide assessment. Unfortunately, again, another example of the system needing fixing is like we don't get the verifiable state test data until August, September. So you'll see that in August, September. And this is somewhat predictive of where kids might perform standardized tests. So again, in the aggregate, we're just looking at, so we looked specifically at math. Math has been a goal, and obviously it's been an area where kids have struggled. And like I highlighted the last time, really amazing things to celebrate, particularly like our sixth graders at Parkrose Middle School, they reached beyond 200% growth in reading, which is like you don't get that by cheating on the test. No, like that's really hard work of our teachers and our kids, and lots to celebrate because obviously those proficiency rates for kids have really been low since 2020, and obviously we've been looking to climb out of that. So One thing I wanted to highlight, Mariah, to start with, is this is part of like, I think a deeper discussion about goals, deeper discussion about like our kids, summer learning. So when you look when our kids take the first diagnostic, re-log in, which I will,
That's the issue.
is one of the dilemmas that is is a struggle is when kids take this assessment in the fall. You can see like this is after some kids being in summer programming, but we see a big slide in our district every year. This is not unusual to see like, oh, you have 11% of the kids. And to be fair, for the math assessment, all elementary kids and most middle school kids. So one of the things that we then look at is we can look at results by school. You can look at results by, but you can see a pretty typical pattern is like really low rates of proficiency when kids come back to school in the fall and they're like, this is what I know in mathematics. These are a lot more precipitous drops in math than it is with reading. And then, Mariah, to one of your questions last week, so then we can look at domain and see like, is there a particular area where kids struggle? And it will show us, you know, like the green and the green stripes is like green is on grade level and kind of striped green is at mid or above grade level. And then you go to the most recent diagnostic. So this would be the third time that kids have taken that assessment. And then you can look at all schools again. Now, granted, the numbers are frankly still low. They've gone up year after year, slightly, percentage points, but you can see again, levels of proficiency definitely increases. And the really problematic thing now is to know, like, you go this far, you increase scores 20, 30 points in some schools' cases. But what we are seeing as a pretty persistent trend is that these below grade levels increase when kids come back and take the diagnostic in the fall, which is why I'm an advocate for, you know, like, our staff, our kids deserve breaks, but I think these breaks can be really hard for our kids, particularly when it comes to academics. So you can see here, there's a small handful of kids at Parkrose High School that use the diagnostic tool in special education classes. But otherwise, you can see here by school, and then you can go, you know, kind of more further by grade level. So we talked specifically about Shaver, because their scores were a little more stagnant this past year. And when you go to the school and you look at their most recent assessment, then you can see this is a pretty common pattern in Parkrose. The largest percentage of kids, the nice thing is you can see the actual number of students who are proficient or above grade level, and the number of kids who are below grade level. And in these red cases, these are significantly below grade level. Because another way I measure the goal is actually the number of kids who are in that significantly below grade level and how much progress they make. And some of the kids that make the most growth, they just go from that red stripe to yellow. But that means that they've gained 2 grade levels of advanced skills. They're just not at grade level yet. But that's really what we have to see the green grow, is to see, you know, obviously kids making bigger leaps than just a year's growth in a year's time. Then I can look at a grade level like this and see like, okay, well, this is pretty common. It is very common to see our kindergarten kids performing at pretty high proficiency levels, but as soon as they grow in the grade levels, particularly when you get to grades 4 and 5, it's not necessarily reflectively true here with Shaver. But again, one of the persistent things is that as they get older and they head to middle school, those kids who are significantly behind grade level, it grows, right? And so it's those interventions, those math classes that kids are taking, the tutoring that kids do at Prescott, the specific tutoring we'll have for kids next year at all schools, because we received the tutoring grant. That is one of the reasons we haven't been able to tutor, is we haven't had the dollars. Next year, the elementary schools will have specific dollars for tutoring. So I can look and see like the trends at each grade level, or I can actually just go to all schools and look at the same for those grade levels. If I go to another school, you go to step 1 school to Sacramento, I can then look, are the trends similar? And again, I really like to look more closely at the domains, and that's what I hope, like practitioners that we're creating systems to look at the domains of where kids are struggling. Because you can see here, again, Shaver had a drop in first grade, whereas Sacramento, so this is where as like professional learning communities, we can say like, okay, well, what's different here, right? Like they're different schools, different cohorts of kids, but you can see that 41% of the first grade class at Sacramento, so we're talking about 50 kids. They outperformed for the most part, like almost the whole school except for fourth grade. So you can see a couple of grade levels here. There's some really good growth and progress. And look at that first grade. They don't have any kids who are significantly behind grade level. And so that's something to celebrate. And but those are also the models that you want to see. Like, okay, how does this cohort do compared to, like, for instance, if you want to compare other schools, these first graders, for the most part, in the aggregate, will be very similar next year. You have some kids moving in and out. Where it's more variable is schools like Prescott and Shaver. They have higher mobility. They have more kids moving in and out than Sacramento and Russell. Plain fact, it's just how frankly, the north side schools compare to the south side schools. There are subtle differences. That just happens to be one of them. And when you have a 10% difference in mobility, that just means like that kid comes and starts in the fall. Majority of the time, they're struggling with proficiency, because when you look at kindergarten, I go back to kindergarten at the beginning of the year. Let's just go to Sacramento. Go to their first diagnostic. It's pretty similar looking, 10%. The whole district was 11%, and you can see. Look at that kindergarten. It's not like a bunch of kids came in with a whole bunch of advanced math skills. So this is definitely showing the growth. This is, I think this is separate. So you can see, like, again, the charts I showed you last month showed just kind of the level of leaps that each of the schools made. Sacramento, Russell, and Prescott all had some big leaps, and Shaver didn't have the same level of leap. And obviously, that's when we look at the data all together as leaders. Those are the trends that we're looking at. We get down to the grade level and see what do these jumps look like. We go like Prescott, which is the next school, and you can go again. When they started, this is where they were at, and then when they finished, recent. Now, granted, still pretty low numbers, but they look at the number of kids that went from, there was, I think, 2 kids that were above grade level, and then you have 54 students at the end of the year. So again, really important that teachers are able to look at. I like to look at the students who went from here. The kids who are 1 grade level below are usually a pretty big group of kids. And again, when we're tutoring and we're looking at interventions, like a lot of times students that are here are receiving pretty specially designed instruction. Students here, it is additional support they're receiving, frankly, most of the time from classroom teachers. And we are blessed with, like, I do think that having a reading specialist at the middle school, which did take a 0.5 cut this year, not because we thought we could lose it, but because of our budget. But again, I was at the front end of this celebrating that our 6th graders have taken such a leap, right? And like take more resources we take away, the harder lift it is for our educators. Again, you can see here, Prescott is showing a really strong trend for kindergarten, and again, first grade pretty strong. But again, as they get older, you start to see those rates of proficiency. Of course, the exams are harder, they are higher grade levels, all of that. But we really, look at how this yellow number grows instead of decreases. Like as a school district, you want to see these numbers in the yellows and reds decreasing, obviously increase. But if you remember 2 years ago, the entire district was at less than 20%. So, we've gained more than 15 points, but we're still in that territory of, and I think the most notable thing is how far our kids drop when they leave for a period of time, and then they come back, and then really having to work. And I'm sure our teacher in the room, our teachers in the room could just tell you, like, yeah, you notice the difference, particularly with kids you work with regularly and they come back and I think there are a lot of factors playing a role in that. I don't necessarily know if it's a cognitive decline, it's just this academic decline that we see. I mean, it's infamously known as the summer slide, but I think that it's more exacerbated now just in the society. Particularly if they do not have enriching activities happening in the summer. Which is why if we're going to do, like, I would prefer that the state fully fund schools so that we don't have to cut every year first, and then think about like what summer programming would look like. Or to create a school schedule that would allow for kids that are significantly behind grade level to receive additional tutoring and support that's standard for everyone, right? Mississippi's a really famous state for a lot of good and bad reasons, and they get a lot of press and credit for their achievement scores going up. And there are really good things about it and there are really bad things about it. The bad thing is that you can't pass third grade unless you pass the test. So they hold kids back. So I don't like that. But what I do like what Mississippi does is that if you don't pass, you are required. You have to get extra help. And the school gets additional money to give that extra help. But why they have high national fourth grade scores is because a lot of kids aren't in the fourth grade because they're being held back in third grade. They aren't reading. That would exist here. You'd have a really large number of kids in third grade that are needing like state prescribed tutoring. But yeah, those are the phenomenon that we look at. And then just obviously for teacher privacy, when I click on grade 1, Mariah, then I can actually see teacher performance and then I can see kid performance. And I like to look at the data from a perspective of looking at growth, and then I can go in and say like, wow, this kid who started in third grade was reading at a kindergarten level or was doing math at a kindergarten level, and to be able to see the progress that student makes. Because I think that's where teachers have been able to start to see what's working and what's not. Comes to the curriculum they use, but also the interventions that they're using. That are behind it. Sage.
Sage. What grade level?
It's 4. And you can see like proficiency rates are low in grade 4. I would say from my like broad experience of knowing the fourth grades, it's a tougher fourth grade group in all respects, like a lot of different things. But at the same time, you see that there's definitely higher performing students in fifth grade. The key here is like you see these grade levels where they really struggle. It's just like, okay, what's that going to look like? It's very likely that if this is so low in the spring that it's going to be, the beginning of fifth grade, you'll probably see a pretty big slide. At least predict that. What's that? So at the high school level, it is next year they are officially required to take a diagnostic test, but because of the, how the high school schedule works. When you do a diagnostic, then you have to set a schedule at the high school to say, all right, third period teacher, you're gonna give this test. And we've been resistant to dedicating the amount of time that takes because elementary educators, middle school educators give that takes a long time. And I think it's good to get these snapshots. I just wish there were faster shots versus because you think about an elementary kid, think about a third grade kid. They take the diagnostic test 3 times a year. They take the state test, and if you're a language learner, you've got to take the language learner test. And these are all pretty comprehensive exams that kids have to take. In my opinion, that's too many tests because we talk about instructional time. Think about all that time that's being used just to test the kid versus, I'm not saying they should take tests at all. Just think we could do it more regularly, but not as often.
So basically, give them all these diagnostic tests to tell you that they need to.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, it is very true. It's very true. And I think the other phenomenon here is you see across the schools, we see kindergartners learning a lot in their kindergarten. Even when kindergarten, like maybe that cohort's really struggle. But you definitely see this trend in mathematics in particular, where it's not necessarily viewable by like, oh, we're really struggling with geometry. This is pretty typical pattern. I mean, the good news here for the Prescott kids is a lot of kids jumped to being above grade level and tested out that way too. When you shift to reading, change it to reading here. So Prescott in 2022 was at 25% reading proficiency. They have 32% of their class, of their school, reading above grade level. So, you can see, and again, Mariah, this is where this data I feel is a lot better because it's broken down into more subcategories. And this is pretty typical when you look at the results by domain. Where I feel like Clark Rose has gotten really good and has improved a great deal is in these first three categories. Phonological awareness, once a kid tests out, meaning like they got it, you usually see like those black dotted lines. It's because by the time a kid gets to first grade level, they're not testing phonological awareness. Because you're looking at like, it's an S, what sound does that make? Whereas phonics is they're having this sound out and pick words and find them by sound. And then high frequency words are words they're going to see obviously frequently. Then you start to see the dynamic that is vocabulary and comprehension. That is the, again, experience, opportunity that kids have to read, the amount of time they get to practice reading. And again, that's where reading oftentimes, again, you see these big slides, particularly in communities like ours, because there are kids that may not get as much reading experience summertime as maybe other kids do. You go to multiple camps and hit the library week that prepared for. So, but the good news is, again, like Prescott's entire school, 74% of the kids that took the diagnostic for high frequency words are showing above grade level proficiency, which means kids are reading a lot, right? Here is where it gets more tricky, is like to interpret text. And if your opportunities and experiences are limited and you're reading stories about agriculture and things of that sort, that's where you really start to see kids struggle. And then when they get to the middle school level, they're talking about more complex subjects, topics, which is why you tend to see the struggle more around comprehension. But look, I did not work directly in the kindergarten at Prescott? Yes. This last year. But again, almost 90% of the kids are at grade level, which hopefully next year that translates. And again, this is a big bump from kindergarten to first grade. But that's a really good sign. I'm sure that Renee and Claire, the kindergarten teachers, tell you, yeah, we worked hard this year. And again, just to kind of give you a similar comparison, let's see where they were at the beginning of the year. So we had some kids who had some grade level skills, but not nearly. Look at the number of kids that were grade level below at the start. And that's pretty cool. So again, what you hope to see for these reading scores when we look at the first diagnostic in the fall is that these numbers are creeping up. Like that recall and that cognitive work of reading is coming back sooner. Because most of the time, teachers aren't giving these diagnostic tests after kids have been in school for a few weeks, but they haven't been in a ton of instruction when they take that first test. Whereas like springtime scores show that. We can go back to Shaver where I started. Reading now. And again, lower scores represented. You can see kind of the areas where, again, phonological awareness, phonics, but again, this right here, Mariah, is just kind of more of an indicator of like, okay, the phonics routines and the things that we're doing in the primary classes, like need more reps, you know, is kind of the term I use, like more practice, more opportunities to respond, because those scores are lower. And again, when you look at these scores, and this I think is the first diagnostic, you can kind of see where people started. And again, third grade, I would expect, you know, they started much stronger than the rest of the school, so that we would want to see growth by the time we get to the most recent assessment, which is 2 diagnostics later. And you can see definitely some more growth. We saw more growth at Shaver in reading than we did in math. And you can see, again, pretty strong in those core, what we call foundational reading skills. And again, I do think that reading comprehension has not gotten a lot of attention because of the way reading was kind of controversially being taught for many years. But I do think that this is experience and time, you know, kind of time on task with reading is key to getting better comprehension scores. But you can see similarly, like pretty strong, you know, pretty good results for kinder, where again, you see like, this is a pretty common trend where like maybe in first grade. And that third grade class did continue to grow, which is good. Like that's where you get concerned, like when they start to lose ground versus gain ground. That, you know, those are the bigger concerns, and you know, like these are the numbers that we're looking at regularly with our leaders as well as our teachers. And again, this tells part of the story. It tells it all, but it does give you in the aggregate kind of like where a particular school or a particular grade level or even a particular classroom that may need more support, in terms of how kids find how kids.
There you go. Question.
No,
Oh.
sorry, it wasn't a question. No, just when we start looking at secondary, we start to see more of our kids not wanting to do that. They become more and more resistant to it. And they kept asking this year, why are we still doing it? Aren't they being sued? So like, that was a lovely argument towards the end of the year, but you see the same thing where the testing just within the classroom and the content, and on top of the diagnostic, throw in state testing, it brings them out. But I can't do my job better. Period. Like I need a baseline, and this is usually where we start in some areas, but the stuff that we see with comprehension continues.
Yeah, look at like foundationally, kids are, you know, they're able to navigate. This shows kind of sixth grade is the one grade that does the whole reading diagnostic regularly. So it's most reliable data. But when you get to vocab, you know, like I remember I was an English language learner. Like I didn't know a lot of fancy words as a kid. I just knew how to like get around. And it wasn't until I started reading more and more books, right, that I developed that vocabulary and having teachers like push my thinking beyond just the literal text. Because one thing that they do ask literal questions, but if kids struggle to evaluate text, meaning like, I think the author means this, or infer text and say like, I think this is probably most likely what's going to happen based on what I know about the character or what I know about the sequence of events, you know, that's a really nuanced skill that does take a lot of practice. And as Leah's saying, middle school teachers often find them in that in-between place where kids are still needing some of that developmental reading work and the ability to kind of access that grade level text. And so it's that much more of a lift for a sixth grader who's below grade level who's then kind of entering into content topics that are frankly just more complex. And they're growing into adolescence, which is layers. Any question. Any other things that are unanswered? Yes, Maria?
But do parents get this?
Parents, like, there's an individual report that you as a parent, you could say like, hey, Courtney, could I get the individual profile? Because then what you would see is your child with the comparison of like, this is a normative test. So like, here's like what a typical kindergartner performs, and here's where your kid is. So that is what's available to parents. That individual report on your child and how the comparison norms and the growth, the typical growth, or how far they were meeting typical growth, or whether they met typical growth, and even more so stretch growth. It's a little bit different for kindergarten because kindergarten, like when they measure significantly below grade level, you see there's not a lot of red in kindergartens because they're in kindergarten. They're just being tested solely on those kindergarten skills, where if I took a third grade test and I was really only reading at a first grade level, I don't do good on the third grade text. It lowers the text for me. It's like, can you do second grade level? And then maybe I do pretty good with second grade level, but then on first grade, that's how I was able to identify more closely what that reading level is estimated to be. Diagnostic.
Does it, parse it out like this, like, the
Yes. Yeah, I wish I could maybe mock up an example and give you a copy.
well, I'm just curious because like you were saying, like the data is like really important, and I think parents, especially like kids in elementary school, it's really hard to know where their kids are falling. Like you have an idea of your homework with them and you have the information, but you don't really have this kind of information. And so for like I would love to know like what is it that I can do during this interim time between this year and next year to keep my kid continuing growth
Yeah.
in these areas, and like what to focus on to make sure like they're set up for success next year. And like
Yep.
I don't have any of that information. I was like, I'm doing what I think I should.
Yeah.
But like I mean
Sure. Yeah. No, I don't think that information hurts at all, right? It helps. And even more so just to say, because my general advice to parents is obviously the actual experience of reading and talking about books. Like even for parents that, like parents who are language learners who may not read English, right? For me, like my advice was talk as much as you can. Like, processing of verbal vocabulary really does help kids acquire language, and even to the level of being able to write them. But I do agree with you, like being able to have like an individualized report, have an idea of the things to stress upon and the things not to worry too much about. Because one of the things I would say in general to the aggregate of Park Rose is that we should be reading more, we should be talking about the books we're reading more, and parents getting more of that information about, for those kids who are struggling with the actual acquisition of reading, like learning the sounds and the phonics, like, yeah, we can, it's so nuanced in those primary grades of how kids are practicing. Teachers can pretty easily highlight, here's a series of sounds they're really struggling to pick up on. You practice by reading this phonics-based book, that sort. I think it should be a requirement if the school's not doing it. I think the school should be providing information. Like that diagnostic happens before you meet with your kid's teacher in like long before. And so that's easy data, at least to be talking to, that I think is more valuable than, the report card. I'll mock up a report so you can see what it looks like, just so you have confidence. And I'll ask Jessica about it too, just in terms of like, what's the you know, sort of first year's principal, but like, what's the, like, I think there should be good routine with parent conferences so that you're giving not too much information to parents to overwhelm them, but information that you could speak to and translate how that could, how their kid could be helped.
Not, ever. Remember, them giving us how we would think for- wait.
Yeah, and weighing the, you know, there are kids who absolutely really dislike taking this diagnostic test, right? There are plenty of criticisms about that. And that's kind of the balance of like, how often do we, because by the time they do get to middle school, like some of the middle school results, I think frankly, that I think teachers must have just been more like, you want to show that you're doing a good job in reading, and they were able to show that this year. But I know that there are kids who just click through, right? And teachers know. And so that's good information for the teacher, but it's also good information for the family just to say, like, this is probably not the best way to measure your kid's performance because, and there's occasional, like, I've gone to some data meetings at schools where they're like, I don't know how this kid scored so high, right? Because they don't show their regular performance in class. But most of the time it aligns with like what, you know, educators are seeing. Okay, retreat agenda. So I just wanted to kind of say out loud, and I said this the last time, to make sure that like as we establish the agenda that we're kind of preparing to talk about the same things. I do want to have some time to interview our new student board members, and I feel like that'll be a chunk of time. And what I probably will do with whoever's chair and vice chair is when we plan that agenda, we just figure like how many questions we want to ask. We'll ask 2 questions to each student and see how much time that is. Could definitely do some activities so we can, you know, do some things to get to know the kids a little bit, kind of lower their filters a little bit. And then I would also like to have time to talk about legislative advocacy. I want to get into the nuances of like, what are the systemic things we want to talk about? Everything from the $2,700 to the Oregonian to a lot of things that I'm gathering now are particular talking points. Like, you know, we're at a disadvantage of the district because when we take the state test, we do have families who opt their kids out. We have high school kids who are old enough to opt themselves. And we are in some ways penalized because many of the kids who opt out, their parents know enough about the system to say, like, I don't want my kid taking this test. And that can be the difference in the report card for a particular school. And as kids get older, we're noticing that trend. So again, if it's like, if you want a standardized test, just find a way to require it, maybe not require it as often, so then you can really do genuine measures of schools. Because really wealthy schools have opt-out rates that are 60, 70%. And they still have 100% of the kids take the test meet the standard. So it is, again, just one example. I'm not saying that's the one we choose, because what we will need to do is kind of go through, here are 9 to 10 systemic things that are things that we're not going and asking them to give us more money for. We're just going to say, like, here are some flaws in why the system is a little messy right now. I hope you're, as like, today's Oregonian has another article about Reynolds. It's a good one. It's a good article. Julia Silverman is writing a series because she went, like Frank Carapello, my colleague in Reynolds, invited her to come and just spend some time. And obviously Reynolds is very similar to Park Rose. The very first article she wrote was about the poverty formula. And so these pieces, I think, will be really important elements to remind you, right? Today's article is about a third grade teacher and just, 20 of the 24 kids needing intensive support, right? As to the reason why so much beyond those numbers and those colors are our kids who we saw walk across the stage, but like the struggles that they're going through on a day to day and the amount of support that adults are having to give just to get them there, keep them safe, keep them comfortable. And by the way, they need to learn at high levels too. And so I think that list of 9 to 10 systemic things probably we narrow down to like 3-4 points that we want to make when we get to meet legislators. And then we also talked about the funding piece. Cherie's example of the 4 million, knowing that we're going to get about $1 million back, not even quite $1 million.
No. More like 300,000.
And that revenue is, because it doesn't come back, the state would need to have probably about the $55 million pot that they distribute the high cost disabilities probably needs to be about 350. I think this last year, the total requests for reimbursement were in the 250 million. And again, like Cherie's saying, like we just get such a small percentage back, and it's just tough to bounce back.
Oh, Lord.
So I would really like for those core pieces to be part of our retreat. And then I think it's really important to give you guys an update on kind of where we want to go for a district. That's a time for the board to really start formulating and figuring out, like, what do we want our goals to be for this year? Being able to look at this data, what are the specific things that you guys want to accomplish? Also knowing we had very serious conversations about bond versus levy. Cherie and highlighted some of and Robin highlighted some of the facility-based needs that we have. And I don't think that we can pass full in a 2 to 3 year period. And they're both things that are desperately needed. My biggest problem with levies is this. Why do the districts that have levies currently, Portland Public being one example, they have a local option that people pay extra taxes for, and they're $50 million in the hole. And I'm not talking about, this is about mismanagement of money and so forth. I'm just talking about the reality of, like, they go out and get a little more money for their district, and if they didn't have that, I'll tell you what, that would be, 100 million or more. And so I worry, I know that if we would have probably had to make minor adjustments to our budget with the levy, but I wouldn't be giving the public what we promised them. And that bothers me, right? Like, that feels so dishonest that we would have, we go out and campaign and say, because we need the money. Like, the money would be going to paying our teachers and paying our staff. But Cherie would be in my ear saying, well, Michael, there's no way we can afford to have an assistant in every kindergarten.
Nope.
So I worry that could be a failure on our part until the funding system is fundamentally changed. And then you could see, again, maybe levies could be done differently, because we're communities like ours are at a disadvantage. And bonds, again, I fundamentally feel like there should be some regular level of funding for schools to keep capital, pay for capital expenses. But 2028 is a year where we do see some shifts in terms of the taxpayer burden. We will either way have to be ready to start the footwork for a campaign, researching and kind of doing that lifting next year. Yep. And then lastly, administrative team updates. So middle school has just finished their process for an assistant principal at Parkers Middle School. And I believe that Annette made an offer today to a woman who is not currently in our district, has some administrative experience, will be coming. Thank you, Malia. And so ideally, that will be someone that we could, introduce you to in August. And we had final round interviews for the Russell principal job last week. We had one of the final two drop out. Had some familial thing happen and dropped out last week, so that's kind of a surprise. So we do have a finalist that has been, I believe, is responding to an offer hopefully tomorrow. I'll be able to introduce you to that person. To our Russell principal. Questions about all of that stuff?
Regarding the
Yeah.
I would say like
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunate thing with both jobs is we have a lot of applicants. Which isn't all. Like middle, element, I mean, assistant principal jobs generally are a little harder because folks are like, well, it's kind of the boss, but not the boss. Well, we look at multiple things. One is we typically have pretty large teams that are mostly represented by, staff, teachers. I think both middle school and elementary have certified teachers, classified staff, partner, and obviously the principal. Sam Ergatius, principal, didn't sit on that was led by Andre and Antoinette led the Russell team, and we had a team of teachers that reviewed applications, and the application reviews kind of based on the rubric. So diverse background, all those things are part of that review that kind of follow like all the employment rules too, things we can edge toward. Oregon didn't scale back a lot of its kind of equity-based hiring guidelines. That did happen in some states, unfortunately. And then when it gets to the interview process, we screen, and those screening interviews is really like deciding like who are going to be our final candidates to go at the middle school. They did a performance task, which is essentially watching someone teach and giving feedback, and then the team kind of evaluating what they said and what that feedback was like. The elementary, we had a school visit, which included meeting with parents, meeting with kids, teachers, and then we just had an avenue for people to provide feedback. The hard thing in Park Rose is we always have internal candidates. Internal candidates are, they get interviews. I think it's always really tough if you have an internal candidate that doesn't move forward in the process. We did have some that moved forward, some that didn't. But I always find that that's a stickier thing when it comes to hiring because we're a smaller community. So time in, and just like any of you at work, you go for the promotion, and this other person who's been there less time than you gets it, or somebody who comes from the outside and gets hired. We have those same standards, but the interviews themselves have a rubric, and they're University of Washington did some really great work around interviewing educators, which are just more general, open-ended questions that are scenario-based to just see, like, in some cases, just like what order of operations issue, but others are more kind of deeply layered equity-based questions that give you a sense of, whether they're fit or equipped. But again, in an interview, you're absolutely right. You can be a really high performer. So again, the stage along the way is also check the references. When we got to the stage like I did last week with the elementary principals, that's when I didn't get involved. And I'm just saying, like, I don't want the references that are on your I'm just gonna call places that people are. Usually references are people that you're willing for people to talk to in person. I try to find people, just to see, right? Middle school in particular, I think, because the last, like Antoinette was longtime assistant principal, had quite a bit of school experience, experience was played a big role too. Whereas at Russell, they had a veteran principal, and they were less interested in experience, they were more interested in relational capacity and communication. Communication was not as big a shaver too.
And I mean, just asking.
Yeah.
That's what.
Yeah, all right, I think that is all my report for question.
Anybody have first reading policy question? Yeah, I don't think there were any options, but
There wasn't. When we
take it back director.
Okay, I was like,
But you did see strikeouts and all that. And new text in gray.
Will July be the official second read?
Sure, unless you want to delay it.
Yeah, for some reason it's not up. Oh, here.
Maybe I need to send it.
It wasn't relating highlights on this one. It was just making comments on this one. And some of the very strange comments I made to you, so. But,
yeah, I just read through it, so I was like,
Okay, so you weren't able to open up into the folders with all of these showing. Okay. So we'll do another first reading in July.
I think almost all of them are related to recent passage of adjustments to law.
there were some that were stupid ones.
Speaking to that, Andre, so 'cause I think as long as we can get to revisions and taking action before it's.
so to add those feedback, I'll put back into this, and then that go. Or are you gonna send us a link?
It looks like this link isn't working, so maybe I have to.
I tried, and then it gave me a
I think
security.
it might just be with the Google, it takes me to the Google folder, but I don't.
I was able to get to print it off.
I'll just share the folder with you guys. I mean, share a folder. Okay. That would be different. Sorry about that. I'll do that before I leave.
online public comment?
Action item. Or to approve, reject the resolution. To approve appropriate levy categorized. This group. Reject the resolution. Moving to stop. Like, this. All those in favor of approving. So next. To approve or reject the resolution. And discussion. All those in favor of approving. Say aye. Opposed? So next would be approving Prescott project. So sample would be approve that property. Approve the finding of fact exempting the Prescott Elementary School grounds improvement project from traditional competitive bid and allow the district's construction and general contract CMGC hiring. Move up there. Discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. So I move that the Parkboro School Board, acting as the local contract school board, approve the findings of fact exempting the Prescott Elementary School integrated seismic and energy upgrades project from traditional competitive bidding and allow the district to use construction manager general contract CMGC hiring. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passed.
I move that for the finding of fact that the Russell Elementary Sheeperd geothermal and energy resource project from additional and allow the district construction that
those in favor? Approve. Opposed? Issue. Your agenda item. Oh. We like to start when we do that.
Or is there a particular way that you'd like to approach that?
Like maybe like for example. Minute. Right. Correspondence or announcement.
Correspondence or announcement?
Organizational meeting, July 13th, virtual. Street. Thursday, August 13th. Yeah, oh, really quick. So, their shoe challenge. 30.
Sunday, right?
Yep. Different. Might work out better.
It's the big.
Oh, the day. Oh,
I was
okay.
like,
Oh, no, yeah, so yeah, well, yeah, even better, so thinking about like back to school. Yeah, that's coming up.
I'm not.
Uh,
Wow, t-shirt.
no, I got the, you know what, scratch that, I have the link, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, they sent it. All right, so yeah, with that being said, move to adjourn this meeting at 9:14 PM.